St. Louis, Chicago. Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I see we have a handful of people who have been to our events before and a bunch of people who are new. So welcome. We're very, very, very excited about this event. It's a good first event to be at if this is your first time joining us. So I am going to go ahead and dive in because we have a lot of content to cover. And let's share my screen really quickly. Can everyone see my screen? So our event today, as you know, is on mindful travel in an unequal world. And for those of you who are new to Impact Travel Alliance, we are a global community and a 501c3 nonprofit that is aimed at improving the world through travel. I have a little QR code there for anyone who is able to donate and support our efforts. That's always greatly appreciated. We keep these events free because we want to be able to reach as many travelers as possible. But again, we are a 501c3 nonprofit. We're independent. We're the only independent nonprofit that is aimed at educating consumers in a way that helps them travel in a way that supports locals and empowers the environment. I wanted to give a quick overview on who we are as an organization. It's great that there's so many new faces here. We've had a lot of growth within our community this year, so I thought it was great to just take a step back and let you all know about what our community looks like in addition to these events. So we have 3 core initiatives, the first of which are our local chapters, and our local chapters host events that are aimed at educating you for how you can explore in a way that has a positive impact on local communities and the environment. Of course, there's only so much ground that we can cover in a 1-hour event, so we have online content as well. So these are more in-depth resources that you can access in order to be able to dive deeper on these topics that we're discussing. And lastly, we have a media network, and the media network is an alliance of 125 plus influencers, creators, and journalists who are passionate about sustainable travel. And we have a firm belief in the power of storytelling to reshape our world and help inform travelers how to explore sustainably no matter their destination, their budget, or their travel style. So I like to think of all of these different initiatives that we have at Impact Travel Alliance as somewhat of an ecosystem of different ways to learn more about sustainable tourism. And again, I like to think about ITA as your friend within the industry. So we're translating all of industry jargon like over-tourism or greenwashing and really helping to inform travelers what that means for you and how you can make sure that you're exploring in a way that has a positive impact on our world. So doing a deeper dive on our local chapters, our local chapters are really the heart of our organization. Community is at the forefront of everything that we do. And our event today is put on in partnership with our local chapter in Greater Seattle. You'll meet Jennifer in just a moment. Basically what the local chapters do is they host events designed to help travelers understand how to travel sustainably anywhere. Since our launch in 2015, we've hosted more than 350 events. We'll do another tally at the end of the year. We should hit about 400 or so as of our 5-year anniversary for our organization. And we have more than 20 local chapters around the world. And what I really see as the beauty of Impact Travel Alliance is that we have this global community and network of change makers, but we're really, really, really focused on amplifying local voices. So that's so important to us to be able to have all of these local voices around the world and give them a platform and a global community to be able to spread awareness around sustainable travel. So this is Jennifer. She is our local leader for Impact Travel Greater Seattle. She's been involved in our community for several years now, and I'm going to pass it over to her to introduce our guest speaker. I also wanted to make a quick comment that as the founder and executive director of ITA as an organization, I feel very blessed that I can see different perspectives from our local leaders around the world. And just as much as we're helping to really broaden the conversation around sustainable tourism, it's certainly not a top-down model. We learn from our local chapter leaders just as much as they're learning from us. And so Anu's book, Beyond Guilt Trips, Mindful Travel in an Unequal World, was originally put on my radar more than a year ago because of a local chapter event that Jennifer helped to support for promoting awareness of the book. And I think that concept of thinking of here's different pockets of change makers around the world and really, again, putting a global lens on it is something that's really special about Impact Travel Alliance and helping to connect us so that we can all learn more and learn together. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Jennifer to introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you, Kelly. And I just have to say, I'm so excited to be part of this growing movement of Impact Travel Alliance. And welcome, everyone. And thank you for joining us today from wherever you are. Our Impact Travel Greater Seattle chapter is really honored to be co-hosting this meaningful event, which I know you'll learn a great deal from and we'll have a lot to reflect upon. I found that myself am going to several of Anu's events to talk about the book. So for any of you in the Seattle area, our chapter is looking for volunteers and to create events like more events like this to help educate travelers to learn how to have a positive impact on local communities and the environment. And it brings me great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Anu Tarnoff, who brings both passion and expertise to her work as a speaker, facilitator, and educator. For almost 20 years, Anu has been a University of Washington professor teaching about global issues, race, equity, and gender issues. Named Best of Seattle by Seattle Weekly and awarded by the University of Washington's Distinguished Teaching Award, Dr. Anu has received multiple Fulbright fellowships to collaborate with partners abroad. As a racial equity consultant, she offers training, facilitation, and other types of partnerships with people working in public agencies, in education and businesses and nonprofits. And we're very lucky to have her here with us today. Her book, Beyond Guilt Trips, which I hope many of you have bought, Beyond Guilt Trips, Mindful Travel in an Unequal World, was named a finalist for 4 book awards, including the Washington Book Award. The book has been included in Fodor's Travel, 13 Books to Inspire Your Travels, and Oprah Magazine's Best 26 Books for All Times. And so from here, I'd like to give the mic back to Kelly Louise to take it to further our discussion.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. So Anu, I think I've said this 1,000,001 times to you and to our community. I love your book so much. It's such a powerful way to think about how we're exploring our world and what our identity is and how we interact with the world based upon our personal identity. And for anyone who has not read the book before, I'd love to hear in your own words, just a summary of really what led you to create it and what's inside of it.
Certainly. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening. And thank you so much for having me, ITA, and showcasing these conversations. Before I tell you what the book is about, let me share a little bit your other question of how I came to it. So I've been teaching about race and power and identity and equity for a long time. And as Jennifer shared, I serve as a racial equity consultant, and I'm in and out of a lot of different places working with people around issues of discomfort, privilege, power, good intentions. How do you make the world better? What does that actually look like? Why is it so complex? How do we deal with our guilt and our shame about all that we might have, all that we're unable to do? So these are some of the ideas that have been on my mind for a long time. My family are immigrants from India, and I've lived a bicultural life and thought a lot about race and culture and identity and belonging and not belonging and racism and who we are. So that's another reason why the book came into being. And I also do a lot with study abroad, international education. I've been having conversations with colleagues and students for a long time about what it means to travel with an educational lens. What are we actually trying to learn when we go far from our home, or actually we're close by to our home, and we're learning about all these powerful differences that structure the world, not just visually different, but systematically make people's lives different from ours, perhaps, right? And I never saw anything in a book form that was really grappling with how people felt and how do we grapple with our good intentions in an unfair and unequal world. And I had been collecting all these stories, my own and many of the travelers that I've met over the years, or the students that I've shepherded abroad as well, and just started writing these small little vignettes for some time. And it turned into the book that some of you have in front of you. So Beyond Guilt Trips is a book of stories, some of my own, some of the travelers that I know. And it's a book that's inviting us to think about all the different things that come up when you and I would like to be more mindful in this unequal world. Uh, those are almost oxymoronic, right? How do you be really thoughtful and more equitable in an unequal world, right? It seems sort of contradictory. And anytime you have a contradiction, you've got vast feelings that emerge from it, all kinds of feelings. And those feelings are often guilt, shame, you feel shut down, you feel impotent, you're not quite sure where your voice is anymore, your power. And so the book is inviting us into conversation about this. I've also got lots of questions in the book. I'm hoping that it gets read in groups of people or classrooms or communities, so you can ask each other the questions. And it's also a tool of racial equity. It's a way of us getting more comfortable talking about things that many of us haven't really grown up talking about.
I love that way of how you describe it as a tool of racial equity, because it is a tool. That was one of my core takeaways from it, is that it's not only prompting discussions or prompting you to think about the world that you exist in, but it's also helping to guide you through that process and become more comfortable with having uncomfortable conversations and really leaning into that space. And so that was one of my personal favorite parts about it, is that it's a critique on our world, but it's also a toolkit for being able to improve our world.
That's the hope, yes.
As you're reading the book, it certainly prompts a lot of reflections. I know that for everyone's context as well, our global team for ITA, we all read through the book, and then we had a book club discussion around it, which Anu graciously helped us to guide the conversation around. And it's very interesting because you're reading the book and it prompts so many different reflections. And I was thinking personally about travel experiences and memories that hadn't been top of mind in a very long time. And I was really taking the time to think about how those experiences have shaped who I am today. And as we discussed it as a group, one of the things that I thought was really striking was that all of us in the group had this immense sense of reflection, and many of our experiences were so universal. So it was really a valuable experience to take the time to reflect on our own identities and privileges as travelers, and also share that with one another. So Anu, you talk a lot about both empathy as well as creating space for others within the group. And I'd love to hear for others within the book, and I'd love to hear more from you about how and why you do that.
I love that question. So let me just kind of back up and go meta for a second. You and I have not created the world that we're in. This world has been created by hundreds of years of institutionalized power and hierarchies that are embedded in almost every institution that we engage with, education, housing, etc., all the way to the very landscape of international travel, global travel. And this much longer history has also been devised to make sure that you and I don't know each other as well as we could. Power is maintained if you and I don't get to know each other on a human, thoughtful, emotional story level, right? As long as I have a caricature of you, and as long as you have a caricature of me, we're not real to each other, and we're just us and them, right? And empathy to me is one of those tools, and tool is a tough word, right? Because tool sounds really strategic. But empathy is certainly a strategic tool. It's also such a momentous heart moment to think about what it means to connect our stories together a little bit. Empathy is why I am a literature professor who teaches about literature from Africa, South Asia, and the Caribbean. My students often don't even know where these countries that we're talking about are on a map. And after they read a little bit about people's lives in a context that might seem really different than them, they start understanding how we might actually be connected. Our lives might look really different, right? But we're actually more connected than we're usually led to think. And so that empathy feels like absolutely the glue. It's the breadcrumbs that connect you and I together. And in a world that is so unequal, to me, empathy is one of the most transformative, most radical tools that we have to rethink our understanding of us and them, right? If I don't dehumanize you anymore, and if you have less reason to dehumanize me, might we actually try to build something together? Empathy feels so critical to that, Kelly, no? And I love that you have shared, you did this in the book club also when I met with you all, and also now you're sharing about the reflective components that come up for us. My book is meant to make you think about places that you have gone. It's meant to invite you to think about what are some of the messages you received when you were growing up about yourself, people like you, about people perhaps unlike you. It's meant to very gently say, let's dig in a little bit, right? And usually digging in can be kind of scary. It can feel messy, but it can also feel really cleansing, right? It can be clarifying for us to really understand why we are the way we are, not just you and I, but kind of as a society too. So empathy, reflection, those are all central components of lots of my work and certainly of the book. I'm so glad that it's making you think about your travels, your lost opportunities, right? I'm hearing a lot about that when I'm talking to people about the book. Many people are saying, how is it that I was on a study abroad program or on a vacation here or a service learning trip here or a volunteer trip here? And how is it that we never talked about some of the discomfort that was coming up? How is it we never talked about our identity as privileged Westerners or as white folks or as this or as that in a community that looked different and felt different? How is it that that was never part of the conversation, right? That feels like such a shame.
That's something that I know we discussed last time that certainly came up for me, where it was reflecting on all of those experiences. And one part of me is like, wow, these were really life-changing experiences, especially at a young age,
Yes.
where I was able to see the world and connect with so many different people from so many different backgrounds. And then the other part of me was thinking about my study abroad program, which was in Tibet, which I told you about. And this is something that I've heard from talking to other people as well. But I went to a very progressive, forward-thinking college that was really, my degree was in media and culture. And so they were teaching us how to critique the world around us. And they kind of just set us loose in Tibet and we're like, go out, learn about Buddhism. And looking back on it, it was like, yes, that on one hand, it was a really great experience at a young age. But then on the other hand, as I was reflecting on it, it felt like something was taken from me because I didn't have the space to be able to reflect on that in a way that just gave us more space to think about our place within the world, and think about what that meant for us as individuals, what that meant for the destination that we were visiting, and how we could take those learnings back home as well. And I really appreciated, first of all, understanding that that's a universal story and therefore something we can do something about. But then also just thinking about the fact that it's okay to mourn some of those experiences and to feel like something was taken from you.
You know, I love that description of being kind of sent out into the world. Go discover Buddhism, go discover X or Y. And that's really some of the most amazing opportunities that students in this part of the world, not all students, but some students have access to, right? Part of the book is also thinking about what happens to the communities in which we are unleashed into, right? Into which our young people are unleashed into. What are some of those interactions that can feel transformative to the Westerner and that can feel really tiresome to the community in which we are learning about ourselves in and against, right? So how do we even do travel in a more equitable way on the ground? I mean, certainly we're thinking about carbon footprint, we're thinking about the sustainability of a long-term trip, et cetera, but we're also thinking about those human relations, those conversations, because none of those conversations are happening outside of a power dynamic, right? They're always placed within history. They're placed within these structures that give the Western traveler in a lot of ways, much, much more agency in the world than lots of other people in the world. And the inequality just between us, often travelers haven't had that much practice kind of unpacking that. And I hope that my book is an opportunity for folks to come together and unpack that, less from a guilt perspective, right? Because it's so easy to feel guilty. But as my title indicates, right, to think about this beyond a guilt trip and to really grapple and wrestle, not because you or I have to fix all of the inequity in the world. I can't, you can't, right? We're not responsible for everything. I'm pretty much only responsible for my life. You're kind of responsible for your life and the small little orbits that we have between us, right? So how do we get more right with our own orbit? How do we get more right with ourselves? How do we have less noise in our head about all kinds of things? And how do we have more integrity with our choices, with our decisions, also in terms of the interactions that we're having with people abroad? How do we not feel shut down because of the guilt? How do we stay more present, right? These are some of the things that have been really challenging for me as a traveler. And they've been really hard for the travelers that I've worked with. And so the book is also trying to invite some gentleness into those conversations, saying, yep, it's hard. How could it not be hard? We live in an unequal world. That's not your fault. It's not my fault. But we live in an unequal world. And if you have good intentions in an unequal world, you're going to short circuit now and then. Yes. And so let's come together in the short circuit while we're short circuiting and learn how to navigate that a bit better with more humor, with a little grace, with a bit more dignity for ourselves and each other. And I hadn't seen anything like that in any of what I was reading that didn't either make us feel worse and more guilty, or that didn't try to say, well, nothing you can do about it, might as well go and have a great holiday, right? It just felt like that was the conversation. And so I wanted something in between that held the tensions of the world, but invited us to think about it a bit more gently, right? We learn best when we're not hit over the head. We learn best when we are gently invited. And so I've tried to do that in the book, right? Just to widen the conversation a bit.
I love that approach and way of thinking about it so that we can learn and grow together. And I do agree that it's also about seeing something that is not visible. We're talking about power systems. And I think that takes such a particular way of making space for and creating space to think about our world in a very honest and open way with ourselves as well as with one another. And you touched a little bit upon just wanting to go and take a trip, or if we're thinking about having a positive impact on our trip. I see, especially within the sustainable travel community, we have so many conscious travelers who are aiming to explore in a way that has a positive impact on our world. And at the same time, when you look at the tourism industry as a whole, or even sustainable tourism, we're often thinking of that impact as in terms of reducing our carbon footprint or supporting local businesses. And I think it's really important to go beyond what we can see in a more visible and tangible way and dig deeper into thinking about these deeper issues that take so much thought to really be conscious and mindful about. And there's a quote that you have in the book that I wanted to share. And you wrote that, as a well-intentioned traveler, I might mean no harm, yet every time I travel, I enter a story of systemic opportunity and adversity that's been playing out long before me. No matter how justice-minded I may be, my journeys intersect with these historical legacies. And I'd love to hear more from your perspective about those concepts.
It's hard to sit with, isn't it? So many of the folks that I work with have been told and taught and reassured that when you have good intentions, your good intentions shield you from what's happening outside of you. And good intentions are critical. They're key, right? Because let's be clear, we also live in a world with a lot of people with bad intention, right? People who are actively trying to harm others. So I don't take good intentions lightly. I think they're critical. But good intentions in and of itself are not enough to actually move the needle for social change, right? Good intentions might feel really good for us, but do they actually contribute to a more just world? That's somewhat debatable. And so it's in the middle of good intentions and, oh no, I can't do anything else, that there's some opportunity for a conversation, right? I love what you say about trying to see the way that power is playing out, not just literally in front of you, but also almost behind the scenes. And the book is also an invitation to think about those behind the scenes dynamics that are playing out here at home, wherever home is for you. I often have folks think about, I'm trying to be a better traveler when I go to Kenya or Nicaragua, but they're not really thinking about issues of identity and sustainability and power and ethics and identity here at home, right? And so more and more I'm thinking of travel as a way to think about not having to go far, but anytime we are interacting with anybody that's pretty much not ourselves, we're traveling in some small way or another, right? Even you and I having this conversation, we share lots of similarities. We also lead really different lives with different identities and different places in the world. And so me learning about you is traveling into your world a little. You learning about me is traveling into my world, right? And we're here both in the US, not even in Nicaragua or not even in Kenya, right? And so I've tried to make in the book lots of connections between travel abroad with some of the context at home, and really thinking about race and justice and power and hierarchy and advantage and opportunity. Because so many of the people that I work with haven't had that much opportunity to think about those concepts here at home first, right? Mm-hmm. And so now suddenly when they're taking their sustainable trip far, questions of culture and race and identity and poverty or wealth might be more highlighted, but the exact same issues are playing out at home. They might not be so visible to you based on how protected your life is from some of these realities, right? But they're playing out. So how do we start making more connections between you and I, between the us and them, between here and there? These are some of the links that I'm so curious about trying to forge together, right? Links that are sustainable, not just temporary links that last 1 week, during the time of our trip or 1 month, but links that actually shift the course of our life in small ways. I'm a small thinker in some ways. I'm always looking for small opportunities for change and shifting, right? I don't have any magic wand to do anything big. I have small moments in front of me, right? You and I have only small moments in front of us. So what do we do with those small moments? How do we create those links between us that actually guide our life in a deeper way? That's transformational travel, right? That's kind of really taking a trip and allowing the learning to influence your life even after you're back home and your suitcase has been unpacked, right? That's the, as they say, the trip that keeps on giving. That kind of lens or analysis or awareness, reflection, that's what actually can keep us in better alignment with one another, right?
I love that, thinking about it just in terms of small changes. I always
Mm,
say that sustainability is a journey, and I've been on this path for a long time, but I'm still learning more and more and more all the time. And hearing you speak about that, one metaphor comes to mind that someone shared with me years ago, and it's about Amelia Earhart. So unfortunately, it has a sad ending to the story, but the way that he explained it to me, was thinking about, we all know the story of the ending with Amelia Earhart, but he made a point to say it wasn't about taking a completely wrong turn, that led to her disappearance. 1 degree shift. And so that 1 degree shift
mm.
goes in that huge direction in a completely different way. And so doing a 180 or doing everything or hitting burnout because you're trying to save the world. It's about making that 1 degree shift so that we can change the trajectory of where we're going.
I mean, let me just also add to this. Does our world need radical, big change? Yes, for sure. I'm not somehow um, making light of all the difficulties in the world that people must navigate. That requires big, big change. I know from my small life, I'm not sure how to do big, big change, frankly, right? I'm not sure I have that kind of platform. I have a small, thoughtful, grateful platform in my life in which I can gesture at the big in some small ways. That seems really sustainable to me, or much more sustainable. I don't want to be extinguished within a month and a half of starting my work, right? I want to be able to participate in conversations for the long haul, right? For the long haul, without feeling so depleted and worn out in my soul, right? And feeling that I have to give everything that I have and I have nothing else for me or my family or my community anymore. I'd like to feel like I've got sustenance, sustainability, all the things that we want for the planet. We need it for ourselves too, right? We need to be sustainable travelers inside of our own self, inside of our own heart, our own mind, right? We need to think about how are we renewing ourself so then we can grapple with some of the hard challenges in our world. None of that's easy, right? It's so much easier to shut your eyes and, put your headphones in. It's so much harder and it takes some strength and camaraderie and community to actually say to one another, wow, this is really complex to think through. Let's do it together, right? Let's rely on one another. Let's do it together in community, right? That feels really key. None of us do anything big by ourselves. It's always in community, right? It's always in connection with some others.
I completely agree. And I do believe that as we become more mindful of how we're navigating the world, we're also able to begin to move through it in a more compassionate way.
Yes.
And I think one of the reasons that I find these conversations and practices so powerful is because we're only at the tip of the iceberg. And that makes me really optimistic for the future. So even thinking about what my experiences previously looked like in Tibet and how it felt like a missed opportunity. More recently, I went to Puerto Rico with a company called Explore Equity, And it's the first trip that I've been on where the itinerary was really crafted in a way that created space for these conversations on like big complex topics like decolonization, power, privilege, and opportunity. And did so also in a way that was engaging for us to experience as travelers who were curious about the world around us, but we were also exploring Puerto Rico through the lens of food tourism. And so looking at food sovereignty and what it meant for the locals in Puerto Rico as well. And it was a really powerful way to experience a destination in a much richer way than a lot of my especially younger experiences had been. And it also created a really strong sense of camaraderie amongst our group. And what I believe is really powerful here is that travel experience, and travel is universally appealing, but it helped us become stronger advocates for social justice. And one of the things that you said to me previously that just really struck me was that silence upholds power. And I'd love for you to tell our attendees a little bit more about what you mean by that statement.
If we don't say out loud the very things that we are navigating and that structure our world differently, what's the point of having voice? Those of us that have voice, and I don't mean just the biological voice, I mean you've got resources behind you, you've got a community, you've got class privilege, you've got race privilege, you've got all kinds of opportunities to amplify your voice. If you don't say out loud what you are noticing, some of the vexations that you might have around it, and how you feel like that's also landing on others, again, what's the use of our voice, right? The silence around how we're feeling, the silence around discomfort, the silence around shame, all of this isn't just in the air, it gets rooted in our bodies, it gets rooted in our cells in some way. I want to live in a world where all people can own their story, where all people have opportunities for grace, for dignity, for opportunity, for clean health, for clean air, for clean water, and to feel like they belong. That's not just about a community in Nicaragua or Kenya. That's about you and me also, right? Silence is a way to shut down our hopes for a greater future. It's a way to keep power intact, because when it's not spoken, it stays, right? But if you and I are speaking it, sometimes forcefully, sometimes more gently, but always strategically, right? We are chipping away at the structure that makes life more challenging for you and I and our compatriots in Nicaragua or Kenya, right? Silence is a blanket over our hopes for something different, right? So those of us that have voice, let's tune it better. Let's practice it better. Let's not use it in an entitled way. That's not the good use of voice, but let's synchronize it with one another, right? Let's synchronize it in a way where we can actually talk about the things that are complex and bring our creativity to bear on it. That's what I want to use my voice for. I've had to learn what that looks like. I didn't think I had a voice when I was young. I felt like my voice had been evacuated with all the racism of my schooling and my upbringing, and thinking that I had nothing to say. And so kind of working my own journey through voicelessness to having voice, and thinking, no, I'm really glad all those things happened. No, let me say that differently. I'm not glad all those things happened, but all that has happened to me has shaped me into who I am, right? And so really grappling with that and feeling settled about what I have in the world and who I am helps me, I hope, have a stronger voice with me, but I hope it also helps me partner with other voices. Again, nothing happens on our own. Everything happens in community. And so I invite you to think about, what are the communities that help you have voice? What are the communities that you help have voice, right? That's so much about mindful travel in an unequal world, right?
I want to bring that back to what you were talking about with domestic travel. And earlier this year, we hosted an event with Aziz Abu Sarah, and he's the founder of Mej Detours. And we were talking a lot about travel being a mindset, and how even though most of the tourism industry is at a halt right now, and most people aren't traveling, especially internationally, to think about ways that we could still embrace travel through the lens of living our day-to-day lives, and even thinking about the fact that so many people, you're mentioning Nicaragua, for example, are thinking about going to a destination like that, but how many Nicaraguan restaurants or neighborhoods are in your own community right here? And so I'd love to think about those concepts and how we can start applying them in our day-to-day lives today.
I was facilitating the workshop yesterday for a county, for staff who worked at our county here. And it was about how to do community engagement better. So how does the county or the city partner with a underserved community? And one of the things that I was sharing is, we might think it's about that community, but it's also about strengthening the community that you're in. What's happening in your community? Let's not only look out. You have to look in order to do good work out. Also, you want to have a better community outreach program? Look at the culture of your organization first. Who's feeling heard? Who's not feeling heard? How is power distributed? How is silence operationalized? How is dignity held back, or how is dignity offered freely in your own work environment? And as you start to strengthen home life, you're able to do better work outside of your own context and home, right? Same with racial equity work. If you haven't done the internal reflection, it's not just about joining a protest, right? There's so much synergy between the work at home, which could be our literal community, it could be in our organization, it could be in our own hearts, in our own families. There's so much connection between that home work and the world that we're engaging with, right? That I'm seeing more and more play out in my conversations with people, very much so.
So we have about 10 minutes or so left for Q&A. So I'd invite our attendees to share any thoughts that they had into either the Q&A feature or our chat box. And as our attendees are sharing those questions, going to what you're saying about this work that we're doing either in our communities or in our world or in our heart. Of course, I've mentioned this. One of my favorite parts about the book is that you have so many tools and strategies to help us be able to turn inward and start to do that work. So can you share some tips, whether that's a favorite strategy or a couple of strategies that our attendees can start incorporating today into their lifestyles?
Those of you that know me will have heard me say this. I think one of the most transformative words is the word and, A-N-D. And to me is such a strategic word. It's such a powerful word. It's so small, but it does a lot of heavy lifting. And I can think of numerous moments on my travels abroad and my travels at home where I have been swallowed in guilt and shame because my life looks so different than the person or the community that I am engaging with. And it's so tempting to feel those waves of shame fall over us. But the more that I've thought about this, the more that I know that simply wallowing in our own guilt trip does nothing to offer dignity to anybody else. it just keeps us locked in our own cocoon of guilt and shame. And so one strategy that I've used, I use this every day, 10 times a day at least, is again that word and. How do you notice what's coming up for you? Whoa, I'm feeling a lot of shame come up. Wow, that's a lot of guilt that's flooding me right now. And also practice the understanding that this moment is just one moment. It's just one moment. It doesn't have to be the writing off of your whole life. It's just one moment. So that and strategy has helped me pay attention to what's coming up and also try to provide more attention to what's actually happening in front of me, right? The more that I practice not falling, I call it in the book, like into this sofa, this warm sofa of shame, the more that I know I'm able to kind of be aware of what's coming up for me, the more I'm able to actually stay present with the people or the person that I'm engaged with. And that and is not about shutting down what I'm feeling. It's about acknowledging and also trying to find and offer dignity in the interaction, right? There are two components of and, two components of any kind of and, right? So that has been a really helpful muscle for me to strengthen over the last many years. It's definitely a muscle, right? The more that you practice anding your life, the more you'll be able to hold two ideas at once, right? And that's hard to do. That's really hard to do.
I love thinking of it as a muscle because that helps remind us that we can get better at it the more that we practice.
Certainly.
Kevin asked, sustainable travel seems to primarily focus on environmental impacts. Do you feel that the human impacts of travel are actually creating more problems around the world and we're just beginning to discuss them?
And it becomes really important with this question too, right? Is tourism and the tourism industry a vital part of many communities around the world? Yes. And is the tourism industry offering dignity in that industry? I don't know. Sometimes yes, lots of times no, right? So I think these conversations I'm seeing them happen more and more, right? These last, I would say maybe 8 years, 10 years, much more conversation about not just the environmental impacts, but also what are the human cultural impacts of moving people and funds and ideas around the world, right? And it's so hard to just say it's bad or good. We live in a world where it's easier, of course, to say it's bad or good, and it's much harder to strengthen that and in between, right? Tourism is a vital part of lots of communities around the world. And do we have an opportunity to lift up some of the sometimes uncomfortable questions about who we are, what we're participating in, what it means to travel along long colonial routes in which the travel industry is often based in? Yes, we have opportunity for that too, right? It doesn't diminish the important economic work that tourism does to those very communities that we want to partner with, right? Again, and it's again, more and more in my life, so much is and, right?
Rebecca asked, how would you define the quote, ugly American tourist? And what are some simple things that an amateur traveler can do to be a more global citizen when traveling?
Good question. Yeah, ugly American is this great term, right, that we use to distance ourselves from those travelers that travel like that, and somehow we're maybe different. I would say number one, aren't we all ugly in lots of ways? Aren't we all participating in things that feel egregious to us? So that's one. Two, those of you that have read my book, you know that the book is also a meditation on what global citizenship actually means. It's a phrase that we're using a lot, but I'm not quite sure what we mean when we say that all the time. And so I would invite us to think about what skills are we hoping to learn when we travel? Is travel the way to learn those skills? What are ways to learn those skills closer to home? What about communities that don't have access to travel? How are folks learning, quote, global citizenship skills from their context? Global citizenship to me these days is the lens that you put on your eyes and your ears. It's listening for nuance, listening for stories that might not have as much airtime. It's listening for discontent as well as joy in sometimes surprising places, right? Those are some of the things that come up when I think about travel, who's ugly or whose behavior is ugly. Yeah, we're all part of it. I'd love to pretend I'm somehow not part of all the things that I deride about bad travel, but I'm a part of it. And that's again where And is helping me think about, I'm a part of some ugly systems and I'm trying to make life a little bit better for a few more of us. Both are true. My good intentions don't protect me from the uglier side of that and, right? Nor does the seriousness of the inequities in our world somehow diminish my good intentions to make things a bit better. It is both. I participate in ugly systems because I'm just a part of the world, and I would love to make life a little bit better for a few more of us, right? Those are the two ideas I think a lot about. It pretty much structures my whole career, those ideas that I just shared now, right? And what is at its center is a big beating heart of and, lots and lots of and in that, right?
Absolutely. I love looking at it through that lens as well, and hearing you even talk about stories that are told less, or the nuances
Right.
within situations that we often write off as black or white. Even thinking about the ethics of travel right now during the pandemic, so
Yes.
much of mainstream media is saying these destinations are open, these destinations are not. And that's the general story that we get. And we've really, with so many of our events at ITA, I've been trying to dig deeper and say, it's about these and stories where it goes much deeper than that.
Yes.
So we do have time for probably one or two more questions. I have, Sandrine did ask, I can answer this one for you, Sandrine. She asked to buy an online or PDF printable version of the book. We'll be sending out a code for a discount to all of our attendees. And so we'll have information for that in just a few moments, as well as in your inbox after the event. And then let me see if I can find another question. Okay. Anne said, often when I connect with people from different communities, those connections feel so wonderful that I want to hold on to them in some way. Friend each other on Facebook or something silly. I notice people don't always like that though, or I feel foolish for feeling that way. How would you recommend creating genuine connection and gracefully letting them go? Or have you found a natural, genuine way to stay in touch with those that you connect with on your travels?
Yeah, I love that question. When we're connecting across power, right, there's at least two things happening. There's the power dynamics that are there, but there's also the sweet connection that you might find. I am training myself more and more to appreciate both. I can't pretend that I don't have all that I have, or that I'm only in this community for 3 days and then I get to leave, right? I can't pretend that that's not true. That is true. And that sweet interaction I had with the lady that I bought tea from, that is genuine and true too. Both are true, right? So again, back to and, right? Strengthening that. Sometimes relationships are meant to be just for that moment, right? Sometimes relationships are meant to have a much longer lifespan, right? I think us having more flexibility and nuance with appreciating what's in front of us and also letting go what needs to not be in front of us can help relieve some of the pressure of, should I friend them? Should I this? Should I that? sometimes interactions that we have don't need to be codified in some way. Sometimes it's just a beautiful moment. Sometimes there is something really important to still link up to. I guess having some space in between those options feels really important to me, right? But, you know, it's also, let's be, we also in our very hierarchical world, we have this sense that, you know, the one Black person is friend to lots of white folks, and each of the white folks gets to say, oh, I'm friends with that Black person. I'm friends with that Black person or brown person or Indigenous person or something. And so the dynamics of our friendships are also part of a unequal world, right? Where sometimes the fatigue of having to play friend to others can be felt differently if you have to play that friend for 10 other people. The dynamics between us are not always so clear, and that can make things kind of tricky too, right? Uncomfortable, tricky, but honest and real. And so that's hard for you or I to pretty much work out on our own all the time, which is why I always feel like having a community that you can talk to about these tricky, sometimes uncomfortable dynamics can help us have more strength and courage in moving through the world with a little bit more grace for ourselves and the people that we're with, right? Again, it's not about always guilt, but it's not only about our good intentions. There's something in between, right? All relationships are somewhere in between that, right? How do we strengthen that? How do we get better at holding the nuance and the complexity? I want to do that in community with others, right? I don't know how to only do that by myself. I'm going to need people's help to help me do that well, right?
Anu, thank you so much for sharing such beautiful insight and sharing your perspective with the group. I do have a couple of quick closing slides to share with everyone. As promised, we do have a code for Anu's book. If you don't have it yet, I cannot recommend it enough. I think I've highlighted half of the book. It is a beautiful piece of literature. So this will come into your inbox after the event as well. But you can save 30% with the code Beyond30 when purchasing directly from the publisher, which is AK Press. And then you're also supporting an independent publisher as well. So that's an added benefit there in addition to that. And these events, as I mentioned, the hour always flies by so quickly. So I invite you to share your perspective and key takeaways in our Facebook group. As soon as I stop sharing my screen, I will drop that link into the chat so that everyone has access. And I wanted to give everyone a quick overview on upcoming events. The first one is the event right now, so you can skip that. Following that, today actually at 1:30, there's another event that we're doing in partnership with the Green Program on a sustainable future for international education. And I'll drop that link into the chat as well. And our last event of the year will be our Giving Tuesday end of the year celebration. And we're going to do a cocktail making class as well as a travel trivia night. So this is our one event of the year where we break outside of our regular format for educational content, and we just throw a party and we do something that's really fun to celebrate. So this picture is Angie on the right. She's our instructor. She's from a social organization and company here in New York City called League of Kitchens, and League of Kitchens connects travelers with immigrants in their homes to teach cooking classes. And they have developed an exclusive cocktail making class for us from Angie, who is originally from Mexico and who now lives in Queens, New York. So she'll be teaching us how to do that cocktail, and then we'll have a travel trivia night with some pretty cool travel prizes afterwards. There's 2 QR codes on here. As mentioned, your donations are greatly appreciated. We recognize that the pandemic has made the economy a very weird space right now. So if you do not have the means to be able to donate financially, Other ways that you can support us are simply by following us on Instagram. You can find Impact Travel Alliance at Impact Travel Alliance on Instagram. And that's really useful for us. And our Greater Seattle chapter is Impact Travel _SEA. And then, of course, for our upcoming events, you can click that click that QR code. You can take a photo of that QR code to get all of our upcoming registration information. So I like to end all of these events by leaving our mic in the hands of our speakers. So again, Anu and Jennifer, thank you so much for your time. And Anu, I wanted to open this back up to you if you have any lasting thoughts that you wanted to leave with our community today.
First of all, thanks so much for hosting this. Jennifer, Vinci, and Kelly, thank you so much. My last thought, this beating heart of and, maybe if there's anything that you take from our this morning for us, maybe night for you, but from this time together, is if your and could beat more steadily and with courage and compassion, what might you be able to hold together, right? What might we be able to hold together better? Yeah.
Thank you, Anu. I'm never going to say the word and again, and I'm going to say so many different things. So thank you. Beautiful.
Good.
Thank you both so much. And thank you to all of our attendees for joining in today. I hope you have a great rest of the day, no matter where you are in the world.